The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to our program. Good to have you along with us for this week here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball, along with the Reverend Robert Cornegie and the Reverend Karl Sorowski. And we do not have Doc with us today, but our prayers are with him while he's out dealing with some other stuff going on today. Well, let's debate the debate. That's the first topic for us today. The long anticipated and much watched. It broke all kinds of records between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. The debate that took place this past week. And there were a lot of Christians who are watching, looking for certain issues and certain signs coming up. A couple of one article that came out ahead of time from the National Catholic Reporter by Michael Sean Winters, and I think it's no doubt where he stands on this, right? I mean, yes. He's very, very pro-Hillary supporter here, but he writes in here about the micro and the macro issues of the debate, and just kind of to frame what we might have been looking for. One of the things would have been the big gaffe. You know, is the crazy uncle going to say something to make us all cringe? You know, yeah. Is she going to just out and out lie about something? Is there going to be this kind of thing that we can point to later? And then the micro issues would be the policy issues. And will there be any attention to some of the kinds of issues? And how would everybody come off? Will they come off as school marmish was the adjective used for Mrs. Clinton? And would Mr. Trump come off as being, a blowhard? So those were some of the things that people were looking for. And guys, just kind of frame it here. I think people were kind of hoping it was going to be like like watching a race, like watching NASCAR, hoping for the wreck to happen.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure there were a lot of people tuned. This was one of the biggest ever, right? Audience.
It was the biggest ever.
800 million.
No, 80.
800 million.
800
billion people.
80.9 million plus another 2.5 on YouTube.
Wow, that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah,
so,
but don't you agree, Karl? I mean, that people are waiting to see if it ends up in a heap somewhere.
I agree 100%. I was watching it, and I kept waiting. I kept waiting to see when it was going to happen, and I didn't know if it was going to happen on this side of the stage or on the other side of the stage. And as the debate went on, I began to wonder if the two sides were just going to crash together in the middle in a fireball.
Well, I think Lester.
I would have watched for that.
Lester may have felt like at the end of the debate that he got run over a couple of times pretty heavily by at least one of the drivers of the cars. But
well, let's look at some of the reaction post debate as well. The same author then writes another one where he says Trump slips on his own ego in first debate. That's his headline there. And if last night's debate had ended at the 20-minute mark, Donald Trump would have been declared the winner. You know, this is something I think almost every comment I've read said so, that he was very strong out of the gate and then had a little bit more difficult time as it went on, and she got a little stronger. Interesting thing in looking at some of the data is that the viewership did not drop off significantly after the first hour. When this thing goes on, 2 hours.
Right.
It's almost 2 hours.
They were asleep, and the TV was running.
TV was running, and so the meter was still clicking. But he follows that sentence says, on the issue of trade, he not only reinforced one of his core arguments, an argument that is winning him lots of voters in swing states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, he also effectively tagged Hillary Clinton as the embodiment of the establishment. She twice employed the phrase trumped up trickle-down economics as if it were so clever that deserved to be repeated. It did not. She appealed to the opinions of experts on their different economic proposals. And she also talked about her husband, as being a job creator, as if that's her own experience. And then Trump fires back, says, well, he approved NAFTA. And that's a big red flag for a lot of his supporters and for a lot of people. So,
Yes.
And a lot of mainstream Republicans. So here this pro-Clinton analyst really is giving Trump a lot of marks up front.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's a term that's used often. I don't know how equitable it is if both sides use it, but the term dog whistle. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just love that term. I think that's so cool. And so, often these debates are really, most of the people that watch the debate are going to sit all the way through it, are kind of the hardcore. Mm-hmm. The general kind of TV viewer is going to be on for a few minutes. Tension span's going to collapse, and then they're going to go find something else. And this is, this was there. There was some fireworks in there, and some of the back and forth that everybody's looking for. Some fender benders and whatnot, but there weren't any wrecks.
Right.
Nobody got run off the course, and they're gonna race another day. So both candidates kind of made it through this first one. Now, what the next two are going to be like, we have no idea what that's going to be like. But one of the things you kept listening for were, and I was just amazed that he didn't bring up the deplorables.
Yeah,
issue. I mean, there were just issue after issue that he had great opportunities to speak on, and he didn't take them. Well, and maybe he's saving some of his powder for the next ones. But from what I can tell about him, he and I think I mentioned earlier that he reminds me of a friend who begins on giving a response to a question. And as he progresses through his response, he kind of loses track of where he's going. And by the time you get to the end, he's obviously just sort of missed it. And so first 20 minutes, he was on his game. The rest of it, it was pretty much reactionary. He wasn't following a plan. He was kind of letting her lead on this thing, which was kind of interesting to see. And he was reacting. She was being somewhat proactive. She was sticking to a game plan. He didn't have a game plan.
What's interesting is that as much as race relations has been a part of our summer discussion and political discussion, how little of it came up during this debate. I think that's maybe is the Social Security issue of the day, is the third rail of politics. A lot of people don't want to. When it did come up, even this commentator, again a pro-Clinton commentator, says that it was one of Clinton's weakest moments, that she didn't really speak more robotically, even brings back memories of Michael Dukakis, which is really sad. But then he says that Trump his momentum vanished after the birther issue came up. But let me switch here before we get too deeply into this. Is that there are a lot of people though who are critical of topics that were not brought up during this time. Karl, there are some who are saying there were pro-life issues were not raised during it. On the stream today, there's talk about the religious freedom, the Supreme Court, some of those issues. Were you surprised some of these things did not surface in the debate?
I was surprised that they did not.
Are you hopeful that it may come up?
I'm hoping that those will be addressed at a later debate. What I got out of the debate more than anything was it reminded me of when Al Gore was running against George Bush, and the two of them had so much animosity towards the other. That by the time the election was over, there was almost hatred from one for the other. And that's what I saw the other night. These two people who, I think it's amazing that they survived 90 minutes on the same stage with each other.
Yeah.
I watched the whole debate, and when it was over, I could say positive things about either one of them. Both of them did some good things. Both of them did some really poor things. I don't think that either of them treated the other with respect. And then the next day when I went to read through news reports to say, okay, I know what I saw last night. Let me see what the news has to say about it. And I went to all the different news outlets on both ends of the spectrum. And, the ones on one end of the spectrum all said, well, this was a knockout punch for Hillary Clinton. The ones on the other end of the spectrum said Trump just dominated the night. And this comes back to what we were talking about last week. We can't get the truth when we read the news anymore. We don't know what the truth is. The New York Times, I guess they still use the thing on their masthead about all the news that's fit to print. Nowadays, you look at the news and it's more all the news that fits our narrative. That's what we're going to give you.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how classic journalism reporting used to be the facts? You know, here are the facts. We're not going to editorialize in our basic reporting. We're just going to do it. And now, you know, we've got editors everywhere editorializing. And to me, it showed that really we had two different audiences for this thing. We had the political geek audience that's looking for that basically is where Hillary was. She's a professional politician, and she did the things that professional politicians do before a debate and during a debate and after a debate.
Right.
She has stayed within the. Trump, on the other hand, is obviously not a politician. He doesn't know any of that stuff, and he's talking to a different audience.
And he has a different campaign manager than he started this campaign with, and so we'll see how he comes up in second and third debates, which are still to come, and the vice presidential debate, which could be a real snoozer, is coming as well. We'll have more coming up here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, and along with Reverend Robert Cornegie and also Reverend Karl Zarowski. And we were talking about the debate in our first segment, the Clinton and Trump debate there, and also how kind of it became maybe the third rail of politics to talk about race at that level, or at least at that time. But there was brought up a little bit, and Hillary Clinton praised the vibrancy of the inner city communities, while Donald Trump said it was like living in hell. His comment there, and that there's been a failed Latinos and blacks have been failed by Democrat policies. Well, this takes on special significance for us in North Carolina as we take a look at what has been going on in Charlotte the last little bit more than a week now, and it seems like it's been longer even. But obviously, there's things that have been simmering for longer than that. And when we look at this, to look at the article in the Charlotte Observer, it says Charlotte clergy plans shift from marches to long-term action on race. When Charlotte street protests expected to continue at least through the weekend, a local clergy group is launching a strategy to eventually shift that energy to long-range action on racial disadvantage and discrimination. The Charlotte Clergy Coalition for Justice, which has more than 70 members, plans to hold a series of October sessions on how race shapes education, law enforcement, health care, and other opportunities in Charlotte. Karl, when we were preparing for this segment, you said that Mrs. Clinton made a statement that about race that was a proper statement to talk about and framed some of the discussion that we ought to have.
Yes, she did. She said that in our society, that race still determines too much. It can determine where a person lives, what kind of job they can get. It can also determine their treatment in the criminal justice system. Is there evidence of that? Yes, I believe that there is. But yet, what I didn't hear was, how do we fix that? It seemed that her direction in wanting to fix that was to talk about the training for the police officers. And this is a topic that comes very close to home for me, because my younger sister is a 30-year veteran of law enforcement. She was a police officer in Burlington, in Asheville, in Garner, several different places. And she has talked with me about the amount of time that you have to make a decision when you have come upon some situation. She said generally you have less than a third of a second sometimes to make that decision. What is it I'm going to do? Now, do I feel that there is ample training for police officers? Yes, I do. I mean, I know the training my sister went through. I worked for North Carolina State Parks. I had several coworkers who were certified law enforcement officers. I know the kind of training they went through. Right now we are being given this narrative that so many of these shootings are race related, and I could see where it might appear that way, but I'd like to think that these incidents are more crime related and not race related. Now, are there police officers out there who are going to make bad decisions and bad choices? Sure. There are pastors who make bad decisions. There are doctors who make bad decisions. There are good cops, and there are some cops that aren't good. But it's that way in any profession. And I think that when we're talking about race in this country and the problems, especially right now with interaction with police, that it's all being painted with these very large brushes. There's these huge swaths. It's either white or it's black. And as my sister has said over and over, you can't know what happened at that moment unless you were there.
Mm-hmm. And as you said, the split decision that people have to make, and again, I think unfortunately that probably is not one that we have to make as pastors very often, is a split decision, but split second decision. But in that, the officers are taught, and I think maybe some of that debate for some of the people that in Charlotte has been: are they taught to disarm the situation, are they taught to de-escalate it, or are they taught to eliminate the threat? And that's a tough one. That's a tough one to call.
Well, my sister shared early on in her career, she shared a story with me where she came upon a situation where somebody was armed and was threatening somebody else. She called for backup. The next thing she knew, she was on the ground on the guy's back. She had disarmed him, and she had his weapon in her hand. She said what happened between seeing the weapon and having the man disarmed, she doesn't remember any of that. She said, but she was thankful for her training because in that moment, she knew what to do, and it happened.
Yeah, it's fascinating as we look through how circumstances have changed, and I'm not saying recently. I think this has been over a long period of time, and how I grew up in a small southern town with a police force, and I remember my attitude towards the police was, yes, sir. And if they asked me to do something, I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to talk back, and I'm not going to demand my rights. I'm just going to do what they asked me to do.
That's right. The police
I'm going to become a small target. Because these guys have power that I don't have in many ways. And I was raised that way. I was taught that way. And to me, so that I had, as a young white boy growing up in a small southern town, I had a respect for the police force. Now, if I had been a young black boy growing up in that same town, I may have had a different experience with the police force.
True.
Yeah.
And when the police came into our little section of town, there was no it was normative.
Yeah.
The police could come in and not be in a on guard position primarily. I mean, it always depends on the circumstances. If there was a domestic problem going on or something like that, then it's a different kind of radar, sense that goes up, and you're trained for all those different things, as I understand it. But that's not the case necessarily when you go into a black community, because there is this this relationship that exists. It's very real, and that's why so many African Americans say, "You're not black.
You don't get it.
You don't get it."
Yeah. And on that score, this is something that while I think a lot of us, and I think on many sides of this debate, would say, holding the police as the scapegoat for this, for the issue, as the source of the problems, is probably not correct. But the fact that you would even say, but if you go into a black neighborhood, that means there is one. The fact that we have this divide about where we live, about where we work, and some other things.
I mean,
let me just just an illustration. I was in Raleigh. at actually in Chapel Hill at a doctor's office in Chapel Hill. My sister-in-law was there, and I was helping the chauffeur, and I was sitting in the waiting room while she and my wife were back with the doctor, and I was sitting there, and there's this little black girl who's about 4 years old, maybe 4. And she was playing, and we were waving at each other, and we were smiling, joking, and she cautiously kind of would say a couple things, and I'd talk to her, and I'd look at the appeared to be grandmother was with her, and so eventually the kind of the walls were breaking down, and we were talking and laughing, talking with the grandmother and all too, and just sharing that, and here comes a siren. Now it's outside a hospital, so you're going to hear sirens, ambulances. Here comes a siren. This little 4-year-old girl says, "It's the police." At 4. That's her first inclination.
When she hears a siren, that's what it's not going to be a rescue squad. Yeah. It's going to be the police. Yeah.
And so I think there, as you said, there is a difference in perception, which is hard for us to get as white guys. It's going to be hard for us to get across that gulf.
Well, I think the church can. And look, I applaud any effort by any group that's trying to bridge the divide. There obviously is a divide. Look, there was so much expectation and hope, I think, for this president, that there was going to be an improvement in the racial. I mean, first black president ever.
Right.
I mean, this is big stuff, and it in many ways it's actually worse. The attitude, I think people their expectation was that it would be a healing thing, and it would be what we're seeing is that there's a polarization.
Well, because the politics didn't break down.
And the polarization is such that if I were to say anything in opposition to the sitting president of the United States, it would be because I was racist, or it would be racial that was why I felt that way. When the fact is, whether the president is black, white, male, or female, if I don't agree with them, it's not because of the color of their skin or their gender. It has to do with their policy.
Exactly.
And this comes back to painting things with broad
and this
brushes.
is where the church, I think, is unique. Because one of the things Hillary said was that the black church has an incredible influence in the black community. It still does in portions of the black community. And so there needs to be, I know Samaritan's Purse, Billy Graham counselors are on the ground. I mean, they're there. That's their headquarters. They're on the ground in Charlotte. There are pastors that are going out trying to bring calm, and they're actually standing in lines between the protesters and the police. So we're seeing a movement. So this is so appropriate for the church to do, to be the peacemakers in this case, for the Prince of Peace.
And we'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Karl and also Reverend Robert Cornegie, who's with us today. And we wish Doc Loomis well. We look forward to having him back next week. Let's talk about another article, completely different, actually, a pair of articles here about religious discrimination in a couple of different forms that are alleged here. This is from GoErie.com, and it's St. Vincent Hospital sued for religious discrimination in Erie, Pennsylvania. St. Vincent Hospital, which was founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Northwestern Pennsylvania, is being sued for religious discrimination. The lawsuit was filed Thursday in U.S. District Court in Erie by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It alleges St. Vincent fired 6 employees who refused to get flu shots due to their religious beliefs, while granting medical exemptions to 14 others in other years. the hospital required that everybody have a flu vaccine that works there. And so they provided, though, for religious exemption, but you had to provide documentation. St. Vincent required any employee seeking exemption for religious reasons to provide certification by a clergy member. So it doesn't seem like it'd be very difficult, not a high bar, but supposedly they did not apply that. So when they refused, again, to have the vaccinations, their exemptions were not approved. When employees provided documentation, apparently was not sufficient. Maybe made up. Who knows? So that will go to trial. That'll be coming out of trial. But here it is, a religious discrimination case. And Robert, this doesn't appear so cut and dry. When you see that they tried to provide some documentation, you just wonder if this is a case of getting bad advice.
Well, most hospitals, look, I used to work at a couple of hospitals. I used to live in one, a floating one, and there were certain things that you had to do, and you knew before you went into it the conditions. You got a package that gave you all the rules and the regulations, and since all of these viruses and whatnot are going around, then everybody knows at a hospital that one of the big problems is cross contamination. And so you want to make sure that the people working there are not dangerous in any way to other people, to the patients. And so we have a clause like that here.
Sure.
That's the way it works. And there are religious exemptions. And it's interesting that they were claiming religious exemptions. They weren't claiming it as a particular health.
Not the latest internet rumor about something.
Exactly. And there is a lot of that out there as well. But this was according to the tenets of their faith, they are not allowed to do this. And so they had to document that they belong to such an organization, and the organization has those tenets. And obviously there was some controversy about whether they actually did that or not. And so they were fired when they could not prove give the documentation.
So we don't know that part of it, but the others.
We do know that they were fired.
They
lost their jobs over this.
The quote from the commission says, "Absent proof establishing an undue hardship, federal law requires an employer to provide reasonable accommodations for sincerely held employee religious beliefs, even if some may consider those beliefs idiosyncratic." So this is what the law says. Now, we've seen this challenged quite a bit lately, but it is in this case. Their argument probably in court is going to be fact-based on what documents were provided. Were they really provided by clergy, or did they just make them up, or they get them online? Any number of things there too. But it's interesting though that that a government entity is the one that filed the suit.
Correct.
The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is typically how employer lawsuits are handled. It's usually through them.
That's right. So, and in fact, that's agreed upon employment. That'll be the mitigation.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Well, in this article, one of the last sentences says, in each instance, the employee was told they, quote, did not provide proof of religious doctrine.
That's
unquote.
Yeah.
And so I could, and this is another instance where we don't have all the information here, so we don't know exactly what happened. But if you were to come and say, what is the religion? Is it Christian Science?
Christian Science.
Okay.
Right.
If you were to come in and say, well, here is a letter from my Christian Science organization, and we don't believe in this. Okay. Well, people know that about the Christian Scientists, all right? But if I came in and said, well, I have a letter here from the Grand Poobah of this organization saying that I'm exempt. Okay. Yeah, I'm a Pastafarian or something. I don't know what the doctrine is of that group.
So you got to
provide maybe in that form there's somewhere that you say this is why we need to be exempt, and maybe they didn't provide the right information. But we don't know.
We don't know
All
that
we
story.
have is what's in the article.
But I thought that I saw this because I wanted to contrast this with a different firing that also took place, and this was at a church in St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church on Broadway in Providence, Rhode Island, where the Reverend Francis kept his Sunday homily short as he encouraged worshipers to be gentle with people who stray from the path of God. The headline from this article is "Outcry at Providence Church over firing of gay music director." The quote from the father is, "It's our Christian duty to, if we can, to make up for our mistakes and try to help those who are victims in one way or another. God wants to give others their due, never to be unjust to them." As he closed the Bible, the sanctuary fell silent. The rousing blend of voices, piano harmonies, and bongo drums associated with the director of music ministry, Michael Templeton's choir, was noticeably absent. On Monday, Templeton said that Father Francis, who became pastor of the parish in July, sent him a text message asking to meet with him. When Templeton arrived at the church, he said he was greeted by the father and a representative from the diocese, who had been dating the same man. Templeton, who had been dating the same man for about 5 years, got married in 2015. They said, "I had entered into marriage that wasn't consistent with the teaching of the Catholic Church, and I needed to go," Templeton said. So here is a case here where the doctrine of the church is being held as the example of why the person should get fired. Robert, this is tough. I mean, because a congregation obviously, may or may not hold as closely to the doctrines as the pastor, as the father should.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. And remember that there is a difference between these two cases. That one is actually a suit has been filed, and this other one is an outcry.
Right.
So we're looking at two different things, which is fine. I mean, but it does illustrate how complicated this stuff is getting. Mm-hmm. And I do want to say, in terms of that first article, is that. This is that question of how far does a government entity, how far can it pierce the if you want to say the corporate religious veil, that there's a barrier that was established constitutionally between the two, that the two different domains, and that we have a governmental entity trying to pierce into the church. And so that's really where that's coming from. This one, obviously, is, like you said, doctrinally determined. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the
Roman Catholic Church.
I think there is a real confusion in the public about, and even in the Catholic Church, obviously, about what the Pope has actually said, how to handle these things. Because he pretty much left it up, as I understand it. I think much like you guys do in the Methodist Church, that it's coming to be sort of who's ever on the ground in that area is the one that's got to enforce the doctrine. I mean, obviously the bishop has come in, and the bishop is part of this process of getting rid of this man who has broken a doctrine of the church. And so, how do you work this out? Now, in the pew, though. They really like this guy.
Yeah. And it's nothing to say the father didn't like him too. I mean,
yeah, exactly. I mean,
right.
he's a really nice guy. And so, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. Well, you mean that where our lives are supposed to be actually determined by doctrine rather than our feelings about this guy? Because really, I mean, we talked about this earlier. This is where this comes down to, isn't it?
Yeah. It is, and it's
a
tough teaching.
Doctrine. Does the doctrine of the church? Are we supposed to? I would say the proper process on this is to admit, hey, he's a really nice guy. I really like him. I hate to see him go, but he broke a doctrine of the church, and so we have to let him go. But that's not what you're hearing, is it? The tone of the article is,
right. Well,
they'd rather change the doctrine and keep the guy, or ignore the doctrine and keep the guy, and kind of paste over it, cover over the issue. So it's does truth true truth really exist?
Yeah.
Or is it just about how I feel about that thing?
Karl, this is a huge argument all across the church.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And in that article, it talked about, I believe his name was Bishop Tobin, was his name, that they had a ceremony of the blessing of marriages. And he was asked, well, did you have any gay couples here? And he said, well, this is for people celebrating 25 years or more, so we don't have anybody like that. He said, we'll worry about that in another 20 years, but not today. And I think this is where a lot of the problems in the church are coming from, is that we can't ignore an issue and hope that it's going to go away, because it's not. And his saying this acknowledges in 20 years, well, we'll deal with it then.
No, probably somebody else will deal with it.
Somebody else will deal with it.
We'll kick the can down the road.
So the question is the church going to stand up for its teachings, or are we going to be lukewarm like the church at Laodicea?
More to come in a moment here on Faith Matters. And welcome back to Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Karl Zarowski and also Reverend Robert Cornegy. And we'll talk about a new TV show that's out on NBC, and it's called The Good Place. And in the premise of this show, and there's actually the Gospel Herald has an entertainment section, gospelherald.com, The Good Place review and the depiction of heaven on TV, good or bad. When I was looking at this guy writes, his name is Mark Rollins. So when I was looking at new shows for the fall 2016, I found that there are the usual ones that feel like rotten apples out of the gate, and there are those that have very unique concepts going on. The Good Place feels like the latter, and it's a situation comedy that takes place in heaven, although they never actually call it that. This is an honest review, NBC's newest comedy. And I'll be looking at it from a Christian and critic's point of view. Did The Good Place get heaven right? I'll go ahead and start and say that, yes, the show is not doctrinally correct. A Christian point of view of heaven, but I'm sure that should surprise no one. Yes, there are no throngs of angels and believers singing praises of Jesus, but I believe that the point of the show is how one deals with the culture of paradise rather than the correct view of paradise itself. All right, so the premise here is that there's a woman that dies, and all of a sudden she wakes up, and she's told that she is that Ted Danson, who plays basically an angel here, right, Karl?
Named Michael.
Yeah, named Michael, which is also good. That he tells her what the afterlife is like. And Eleanor, who is played by Kristen Bell, sees a sign that says, "Welcome, everything is fine."
Right.
And they're given an orientation that says, you've come here because you have earned so many points. You have there are points for doing good acts, and there's negative points as well. And one of the negative points, which I thought was really funny when it popped up on the screen, was using Facebook as a verb. So this is there are things about this, and when she asks about it, says that. He says, well, the Christians, the Buddhists, the Hindus, they all got a little bit of it right.
About 5% right.
About 5% right.
Yeah.
But they said, but there was a stoner who all of a sudden one night got 92% of it correct.
Correct.
And they have his picture on the wall. They say they're watching everything. So they have this sort of idea that someone is watching everything you do. So it's a works righteousness kind of thing, Robert. I mean, is that you're going to earn your way? And frankly, isn't that what a lot of people think is heaven? Is that you're going to earn your way there?
Oh, that is so sadly the truth. That Jesus kind of opened the door, and we've got to figure out how to get through the door ourselves, or maybe he got us through the door, and then we got to figure out how we can keep us there. That's the other part. It's all about us, basically. Mm-hmm. It's really not so much about him. Mm-hmm. And it's about our looking at the scales of life, and we've got the one side that has the bad stuff on it, and the other side that has the good stuff. Good acts.
They use that analogy.
Absolutely, because that's it. And it's actually a Muslim. That's Islam. That's not Christianity. But we've adopted it as kind of our norm. And you can look at any kind of man-made religion. They always put this works clause in there. You've always got the workaround. And the workaround, Jesus said, hey, look, I'm it. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. This is it. I'm it. I'm the guy. I'm the way. I'm the door. I'm the one. And then we see these other, but if I'm really, really good, I can get there. I can score enough points with God that he'll let me in. And hopefully God, judges on a curve. So he'll be able to, but
that was also the battle of the Great Reformation too.
Absolutely, that was where the kind of rubber met the road when Luther nailed his 93 theses on the wall. That this was it. These were the things. So it's the popular thing. This is the popular culture concept of faith.
However, in this TV show, the premise is that this woman gets there by mistake. Is that she really is totally off kilter from what they expect. She hasn't done any of the good things that they ascribe to her memories. It says those aren't hers. And so the questions come up. But I know, Karl, you watched it. So I did.
I did.
And we're both Monty Python fans, so we get both, religious
religious sarcasm, religious satire. I get that. When I watched this program, was I offended by it? No, I wasn't.
I was
offended
expecting
by
to
it.
be, but I wasn't offended by the first episode.
When I watched it, I said, okay, they're really not making any theological attacks on God or Jesus or anything like that. I'm not even sure if I heard God's name mentioned.
No.
Okay, it's just there's this place.
Michael mentions his
and it's
boss.
Called The Good Place.
Yeah.
And when Ellen wakes up, she has no recollection of how she died, and even the way she died was rather comical. She was run into by a bunch of shopping carts and then hit by a truck or something like that, which actually isn't funny. But Michael is explaining this, and he says, "You don't really want to hear anymore."
That's
and she says, "No,
Danson's characters.
And then she asks him. She says, "Well, am I in the good place or the bad place?"
Well, she does a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Right, and he says, "You're in the best place." Okay, but as a pastor, we deal with end-of-life issues. And I have talked to people who they were followers of Jesus, they believed in Jesus, they had accepted forgiveness, they were saved. And they're lying on their hospital bed, and I said, well, are you worried about what's going to happen next? And they say, well, I hope I've been good enough.
Yeah, right.
And that's very sad because it's not about being good enough. But that's what this show is teaching. And so I think this show, while I didn't think it was a great show, I mean, it's called The Good Place. I don't think it was a good show, so I doubt I'll watch it again. The writing wasn't all that great. Yeah. There were some funny things in there. Yeah. But what worries me more is how is this show going to affect unversed Christians or infant Christians or Christians who have still been told it's all about what you do, being good enough. Here's this girl, Ellen. She's there. She knows she's not supposed to be there because of a paperwork problem. Okay, God made a paperwork mistake, and somehow she got in. But now her fear is that she's going to get thrown out when they find out she wasn't good. So now, even in the good place, she's trying to be a better person and trying to do good, I guess, to earn enough points to stay.
Well, but the acknowledgement, though, is that there is an opposite.
Yes, that's true.
Which is interesting. What a lot of pop culture does not want to recognize. And there's even a scene where they call on this Siri-like character, this database, say, well, what is the other place like? It says, oh, well, I can't really give you a description, but I can play you a little audio clip, and you get an audio clip of people screaming in anguish, and so that part. You kind of recognize it, saying, well, at least they're acknowledging that.
The wailing and gnashing of teeth on the other side. Yeah.
And she says that is not awesome.
Yeah.
And the point system on how to get in, Ted Danson says this is so complicated, you'd never understand it. And she starts saying, well, did Mozart come to the good place? No. No. What about this person? No. Pretty much
Florence
none of the
Nightingale.
artists made it here. What about Florence Nightingale? No, she didn't make it either.
Yeah, it's interesting how they phrase some things that we might look at and find a teachable moment to, and other things that we're going to have to find a correcting moment for. You know?
Like kicking a dog into the sun and watching it explode because it's not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Yes, Robert, they really did that on the show.
That's a spoiler. But it's I didn't make it that far. That was in part 2, the second episode. I didn't get there.
So I'm guilty. I watched more than one episode.
Yeah, there you go, Carl.
But I won't be
We're gonna
watching
be praying
a third.
for you, brother.
I won't be watching a third.
But when we look at pop culture and how they recognize any of our tenets, almost always, I mean, even ones that they're trying to do things like Noah, like the movie Noah,
Right.
Or you take the AD Chronicles even on television, which a lot of people really, really love.
Right.
Says that, but that's not the Bible. So you still, if you don't go back to the original source, you're taking a paraphrase.
That's right.
At best.
Yeah.
At worst, a total manifestation of a lie.
Right. Well, we've come, and I mentioned it earlier, and I keep coming back to it because I talk to a lot of college students, and so part of my work with them is trying to get them just to understand that there is a truth that overrides all feelings or anything else. That there are objective, universal, absolute truths that are out there through the revelation of Christ, and getting them to understand that just because their belief in something doesn't make it true, or their disbelief in something doesn't make it untrue.
Right.
And if it's true, it's true. If it's not true, it's not true. There's no gray there. It's black and white.
They can neither speak or think things into reality, right?
That's what they think. They can create their own realities. And that's kind of somewhat this. That's why working for salvation is such a popular concept in every religion except Christianity.
Right.
It's Him. Yeah. It's not about us. He did it.
All right. Thank you for joining us once again on Faith Matters on the Talk Station.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I'll give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of the Talk Station.